Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Hunt Science Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Lance, a professionally certified wildlife biologist and natural resource professional, college professor, and owner of Land Source Consulting. The Hunt Science Podcast is dedicated to bring you the latest information on popular habitat management topics, wildlife science, hunting strategies, and the general conservation and land management practices to help preserve our natural resources. Thank you for joining us today. We are excited to have you with us and hope that you enjoy today's episode. With that said, let's get started. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by our primary sponsor, Land Source Consulting. Land Source Consulting is an Ohio-based wildlife and land management consulting company that I own and operate not only here in Ohio, but through the Midwest and beyond. At Land Source, we work with private landowners just like you to build and develop those property-specific management programs to help bring the goals that you have on your property to life. If you're interested in getting more information on who we are and how we can help you, please visit us over at landsourceconsulting.com. There you can check out the different service packages and capabilities that we can provide. We would love to hear from you, so don't hesitate to reach out to us and schedule that free consultation either through our website, or you can reach out to us and connect with us on our other social media platforms such as Facebook and Instagram. That's landsourceconsulting.com, building relationships for a more sustainable future. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the show. I would like to first thank those of you who are returning to us once again, and of course, welcome those who are new and just finding us for the first time. Now, before we get started, a few general reminders. If you've not already done so, please subscribe to our YouTube page by heading over there and hitting that subscribe button. Of course, if you're already watching today's episode, then you're already here, making it that much easier. Don't forget to also like our video episode for today by hitting that thumbs up button. And of course, also don't forget to hit that bell notification icon so that you can be updated when we release new content here on the channel. Now, on today's episode, we have Dr. Dan Collins, who is a migratory bird specialist for the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. I have heard Dan speak on other podcasts, and as we go down the path of creating more waterfowl-specific episodes, I wanted to begin by doing a very basic discussion on waterfowl, their migration strategies, and even how the migratory bird surveys are conducted not only by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, but also their partnering roles with state agencies. Dan is a great wealth of knowledge on all things migratory birds, but has a particular passion for waterfowl. We look forward to having him on future episodes, just like we do all of our guests, to talk more on specific waterfowl topics. But for today, we're going to start off at the bare ground level. Nonetheless, it was a great episode as usual. I thoroughly enjoyed my time with him, and we hope you all enjoyed as well. Now, let's welcome Dan Collins to the Hunt Science Podcast, and let's get this episode started. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Hunt Science Podcast. Today, I am joined by Dan Collins from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Dan, how are you doing?
I'm good. And yourself?
Good. Thanks for coming on. So, we were talking off air that, I heard you on another podcast, and, over the past couple of years, like I said, I've really transitioned. Not that I don't do deer and predators and habitat and stuff like that, but I've really transitioned into waterfowl over the past 4 or 5 years. It's something that's taken hold and just something I can't shake, man. And I knew it was going to happen. I tried to avoid it. And I think every duck hunter has probably said that. Just like, man, it's time consuming. But anyway, here we are. I wanted to start doing some more episodes on waterfowl related topics. I mean, there are podcasts out there that focus on waterfowl, but there's not near as many as there is, covering the other species that we hunt here across the United States. So thank you for coming on, and hopefully everyone's going to enjoy this.
Yeah.
All right.
Be a good conversation.
Yeah. So, for those of you that are more local listening, to me, we are in a different flyway, right? So we're going to talk about the flyways and things like that. But before we get going, what I do with every guest is kind of an introduction, who you are, where you're from, and what got you down the path of working for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and being a wildlife biologist.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up on the Delaware River in Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia. So northeast of Philadelphia. In and around sort of Washington's Crossing, Yardley, Morrisville area. My parents moved out of the city into the farm country. We were surrounded by about 20 farms, so I was always outside just catching crayfish and garter snakes and salamanders. Didn't grow up hunting or fishing, or I actually fished a bunch with my buddies. Went on to college and I knew I didn't want to do what my dad did, which was wear a suit and be a businessman, and got a degree in biology, and then decided or was dumb enough to go on to get graduate degrees. And when I was doing my master's degree, I did a badger project down in South Texas, and the group of graduate students, I basically cut a deal with a couple buddies who I'm going to actually turkey hunt with next weekend. And I said, hey, I'll teach you how to rock climb if you teach me how to shoot a gun and hunt. And, that's not really the traditional way of most people getting into the outdoors or consumptive users. And so they taught me how to hunt, and I'd never taught them how to rock climb. So I won on that deal. And then I did a bunch of seasonal jobs and was fortunate enough to get offered a PhD position because those guys introduced me to duck hunting. And like you said, I got hooked almost right away. And I went on to do my PhD on wetlands and waterfowl in East Central Texas on a big moist soil unit that Texas Parks and Wildlife has. And from there, I got my first job with the Fish and Wildlife Service as a wildlife biologist. And I was the assistant to the Pacific Flyway representative. And that person is unique. There are only 4 positions, so there's reps in all 4 flyways. And I was basically his assistant, and I did, surveys, monitoring, analyses, write papers, put data books together to help inform how we go about managing harvest and habitat conservation and all the things that go into migratory game birds. So not just ducks. So we sort of cover all the entire suite of migratory game birds. And then I was fortunate enough to get my position where I am now. So I'm based in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in our regional office. So I'm the regional migratory game bird biologist. So my region is Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Arizona. But I'm also engaged with both the Central and Pacific flyways. So if you think about Texas north into the Canadian prairies and then west all the way to Alaska, I interact with every single state biologist at some level, state waterfowl biologist.
Nice. That's good, because that was going to be my next question. I knew what your current role was, because I'm researching you a little bit. I saw the shift there, in the territories. That's good. So the west of the Mississippi is something that I wanted to focus on, because that's where a lot of the waterfowl research and stuff is, because prairie pothole region and all these regions that are just rich in waterfowl species. I mean, that's where a lot of stuff is done. You see the Delta guys there. I mean, waterfowl research is done all over, but the west of the Mississippi is kind of the heartland of it. So when I heard you on that podcast, like I said, I was like, all right, I got to reach out to this guy. So speaking of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, so I think it's interesting for people to hear, how does season limits, how does the season limits get set? What goes into all that? Obviously surveys. I want to transition, from how you guys go about on setting season dates, because you said you interact with the state biologist. So within your flyways, what do those conversations look like? What do the surveys look like? And what are you guys doing? And how do you prepare for adjusting those dates or keeping them or whatever?
Sure. So for survey work or survey and monitoring work, think of it as 3-pronged. So we have our May survey. So count the number of ducks on the landscape. We have our banding program, which allows us to inform harvest management or harvest rates. And then we have our parts collection survey. So maybe some of your listeners, viewers have been brought into that. So basically keeping a diary or sending in wings to what we call our wing bees. And that gives us the ability to basically age, sex ratios. It also informs harvest rates. So those 3 are our main waterfowl monitoring programs, with the May survey really being the biggest, where we're actually counting the number or estimating the number of birds on a really, really large landscape. And that gives us our population abundance estimate. And depending on the species, most species fall under the mallard number. There are species-specific harvest plans. So pintail, scaup, canvasback, redhead, wood ducks have like their own, but everything else, and teal for early teal season, the population abundance, but everything else is really lumped under mallards. And each flyway, so the Mississippi and the Central Flyway share the mid-continent population of mallards, and then you have the Pacific population and the Atlantic population. So if we're thinking west, sort of the west side or, middle part of the country, mallards are king.
Yeah. Typically, how do you guys do the surveys? Are you guys doing helicopter flyovers and looking down? You guys doing just glassing? Like, what's the combination of surveys you guys are doing?
So May survey is aerial and it's fixed wing.
Gotcha.
Depending on the part of so the survey starts in the Dakotas and eastern Montana, and then goes up into the prairies in Canada and boreal forest and then Alaska. So there are this survey has been going on for over 50 years now. It was established back in 1948 and then was operational in early 50s. And we have line transects on the ground. And the pilots, so we have pilot biologists and then they're biologists in the right seat. And they fly these fixed transects and they count every single duck, or attempt to count every single duck, an eighth of a mile off of each side of the plane. Yeah. And then we come in, and then there's ground crews where we come in and we actually are truth, because you got to imagine if you're flying a plane, you're not seeing every duck. And if you're flying at 100 to 150 knots, you're not really seeing everything. So we see the truth on the ground, and that is creates a visual correction factor for the pilot and the observer. So think it's a ratio. So for every one mallard that the pilot sees, we're seeing 3, and so it adjusts the number that are seen in the air, and it gives our statistician the ability to extrapolate out across the entire landscape.
Yeah. That's always fun. We kind of do the same thing with like our drone surveys and stuff like that, no matter what it is, just to go down, especially with, like we were talking off air, the project I got going on with the henhouse study and stuff, part of that is also trying to locate the upland nests, where they're nesting in those areas, and having, pointers, it comes in handy a little bit going out there with, the drones and the thermal. We do have access to a couple thermal drones, but those are expensive and hard to get. So, it's always one of those. And, my dogs in particular, like, German short hairs and stuff, they're pointing dogs. So they generally aren't going to, do anything, that you don't want them to do. So that's good. They just point out a nest. I've had it happen quite a few times. I'm like, all right, good. It worked perfect, cause they get the scent of the birds there and they're like, what is that? And then you go over there and you find a clutch. You're like, yes, I did it. Like, good dog. They're kind of confused because they're like, there's no bird here. Like, what am I getting, appraised for here? There's no pheasant. What's happening? Type of thing. But anyway, so what is the interaction like? Cause with the territory that you're covering is so vast, and the interactions you guys are having with, I'm assuming each state, is going to be incorporating the same type of, truth correction for their property in terms of working with you. And then do they have their own, statisticians in places like that are, incorporating their data for their state? Or is it just one big, team that you guys are coming together and making those requests for each state and territory?
So for the monitoring as a cooperative effort, it's by and large led by the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Canadian Wildlife Service. So most of the time, people that are doing the surveys, the May survey, it's all federal employees, so to speak, that are doing it. And it really gets to, so we as the Fish and Wildlife Service, we use this data to create the frameworks that the states work between. And that's sort of why the flyway system was created. It was meant to be a cooperative effort where we as the federal government sort of have oversight of migratory birds because of the treaty. Yeah. And then we basically lay it out on the table and say, this is what is available, so to speak, for you all to work within.
Yeah, and for people listening to, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act is what he's talking about, and then obviously the flyways. You can look it up, Google it or whatever to see the boundaries. But we got going from east to west, the Atlantic, the Mississippi, the Central, and the Pacific, the four main flyways that we have here in the United States. So we mentioned flyways, Mississippi or whatever. That's what we're dealing with, and you can look up, like I said, on Google to find the boundaries and see if you're curious and don't know, what state that you're actually in. So what kind of project, just because this is my curiosity kind of coming in, because I don't interact with U.S. Fish and Wildlife as much at all. What kind of things do you guys have going on right now as far as that are exciting as far as migratory birds, waterfowl specific, projects that are interesting that maybe people don't know is going on, that they might be interested in hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak to the projects that I've been involved in.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so for myself, I've had, by and large, a lot of us that are waterfowl biologists, whether be state or federal, we've all sort of tapped into the new technology, the GPS, GSM satellite units, to allow us to mark a large number of birds and follow their movements, and to answer a lot of different questions. So redheads down in the Laguna Madre of Texas was my first waterfowl project when I moved to the region. And that was really looking at if you look at the Texas coast, it's supposed to be, or is slated to be developed with wind farms, basically throughout the entire coastal area. And there's a really big wind farm just south of Corpus Christi. And if you know anything about redheads, 80% of the continental population overwinter in the Texas Laguna Madre area. So you're talking, at one point we were pushing like 1.1 million birds in the continental population. So you're talking about like 800,000 redheads. And this is a really, really important area, but the Laguna itself is hypersaline. So these birds, all these birds that use this system, they need fresh water to purge all that salt out of their system. So they need to fly inland to stock tanks, to natural depressions that have caught, just rainfall from hurricanes or just natural thunderstorms. And the wind farm creates a barrier. So it's a disturbance displacement issue. And what we found is basically they avoid the wind farm. So what we were able to do is sort of use those movements of these birds inland to identify areas where enhancement, conservation, restoration needs to occur to sort of steer development around or away from those areas, or to encourage like Laguna Ascosa state wildlife areas to make sure that they have fresh water available for these birds on the landscape. So that was sort of my first waterfowl project. And then now I've gotten caught up in northern pintail work, mottle ducks, Mexican mallards. Putting a waterfowl project on the ground in southern Arizona.
Okay.
Looking at the importance of stock tanks in southern Arizona to Mexican ducks, and then another dabbling duck. Just sort of how are they using that landscape? So in the state of Arizona, stock tanks are listed sort of as a threatened system just because of the importance of their water, their ability to catch water. And if you've ever been in Arizona, it's not a very wet state. So water is super important food to a lot of different things, cattle, four-legged animals, and birds. So some of the notes that you sent me, they really get to a lot of the things that we're doing, migration strategies, how can we identify where to put conservation on the ground. And then I'm involved in a couple other goose projects. So greater white-fronted geese and cackling geese.
Okay. Yeah. Cause I mean, you talked about wind farms, and the barrier effect is a thing that I don't think people realize, too. For my work as a consultant, we've done quite a bit of mortality surveys and things like that for, a lot of different species just to go out and as part of a due diligence projects and things like that. And it's an issue, that it's good to see that there's conservation efforts going around those to detect, the issues, and then, like I said, conserve those areas because, wetland ecosystems are becoming an issue. The degradation and things like that are a problem. I see it, in my work. I see it in my state here in the Midwest. I'm sure, it's touched, everybody, as far as it goes. But let's talk a little bit about the importance of those types of areas. You mentioned stock tanks. I'm bringing up wetlands and marshes and things like that, and talk about the importance of those types of habitat resources and why they're so important to maintain and conserve because of their role as stopping points during migration and things like that.
Yeah. So water, wetlands, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
is important across the entire landscape for a lot of different reasons. Cleaning of water, storm abatement, foraging resources for those species that are dependent on that water. So yeah, it's really nuanced, but if we think about water, and I think everybody is dealing with different things. Some areas have too much water. Some area and those areas with too much water could be more saline than it needs to be. Think Texas coast, Louisiana coast, Mississippi, Alabama. In the West, we go through these drought cycles where we don't have enough water. And now you get these atmospheric rivers and you get too much water. But yeah, the most important thing is for migratory species, I would say, is if we don't have enough wetland ecosystems on the landscape, and it creates for longer distances for those birds to travel, there's potentially these cross-seasonal or these carryover effects physiologically that could have on these birds. So if we don't have those traditional staging stopover areas like the Platte River, San Luis Valley, Sonic region of California, Oregon, the river systems that you guys rely on, Illinois, Mississippi, all those big rivers and pools that are there. If these birds aren't able to refuel, restock all their needs, nutritional needs, when they get back to those breeding grounds, it could have reproductive effects. And we could start to see, it'll be real slow, it'll be real subtle. We start to see declines in abundance. And abundance is what drives harvest, right? Whether it's managing harvest from the federal side or just the number of birds that you're going to see on the landscape available to you as a hunter.
Yeah, with us, we definitely are not a water shortage. We get a lot of rain here in Midwest, especially here in Ohio. So when I look at it, and you talk about degrading wetland systems and things like that. A lot of our wetlands are our Category 3, Category 2 wetlands. These high quality wetlands areas that you would consider really good habitat are the ones that are massively declining. I mean, you look around and you get, Category 1 emergent wetland systems, that kind of are present in a lot of areas. But yeah, it's water, but you're lacking a lot of the sustenance that is exhibited in these areas that birds can utilize. So, think of the Mississippi Flyway heading south, whether it to be, Arkansas or Alabama, wherever. It's like, okay, if you have a lot of these emergent wetland systems and there's no food, right, or anything like that, like there's nothing there to replenish. So like you said, the carryover reproductive success and fitness is going to be an issue, and then they're going to see issues in the southern part of the state when they're, in their season going to cause issues. It's a cascading event. So, looking at least I'm talking from, our flyway here in Mississippi, the Midwest region, it's really important to understand, like, even I talk a lot about private landowners, right? Talk a lot about the private landowner, like what are you doing to manage and conserve, species that you love, and whether it's deer, whether it's turkey, whether it's grouse, whatever it is, we're talking about waterfowl, but understanding like, hey, I've got 2 wetlands on my property. How can I make these wetlands better? Like, what can I do? Right now, probably gonna have to get some Army Corps involvement, right? So don't go out there and just start, doing things, right? Consulting with people like myself or others, depending where you are, to look and see like what can you do to enhance the habitat for these areas, given what we know, how birds migrate and the stopping points that they need. Because Ohio, it's 95% privately owned, and it's like, you want the state to manage 5% of it. Like you gotta take some responsibility here. If you enjoy, hunting deer or hunting turkey or waterfowl, whatever it is, you got to do the management. I was on, there's a landowner up here that's part of our hen house study that has, 1,000+ acres of property and has a lot of water on his property, and he manages it. And the other, we were out 2 weeks ago or so, and we saw north of 1,500 birds, 12 different species, coming, through. And, that's what you want to see. Like, here's a stopping point. There's plenty of resources. Like that was refreshing. It's the first time I've been to the property, and it was nice to see, because we're heavy ag. You don't see a lot of that stuff. And this was a heavy ag property, a farm, legacy farm, family farm, big waterfowl hunter, and understands conservation and manages his property, and look at the benefits, type of thing. So it's something that I try to push a lot with private landowners on all species, because you got to manage, it for the property, because you can't expect the state or even the federal level to do all the work when they only have such a small footprint that they can actually manage.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. Private landowners are the key to conservation in the country. Even out west, where, you get states that are, 50, 70% publicly owned through the Forest Service, BLM, and that sort of thing. But it's the private lands that are in those important pinch points, or those areas that you got to figure out how to meet those private landowners.
Yeah. Well, 100%. And hey, listen, not every private landowner can do it, which is fine.
Right.
But understand there's agencies out there, there's conservation groups out there that you can join for $35. And that $35 is going to go a long way, the people that do it, whether it's Delta Waterfowl, whether it's Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, Rough Grouse Society. I mean, the list goes on for the species that you're talking about. We're talking about waterfowl right now, Delta and Ducks Unlimited being probably the two big ones, but, just becoming a member, and $35, or whatever it is for a membership, and all the stuff you get with that. And then, the conservation efforts that money goes towards, can help offset, the inability. Maybe you have property, but you don't have a lot of it, right? Type of thing. So every little bit adds up, and it's kind of the theme for each episode here is kind of how to get involved in the species that we're talking about. What can you do to fix it? So talking about migration, you guys do a lot of telemetry studies, right? You got a lot of birds that are banded with telemetry, and able to model that and look at that with satellite data. How is the migration patterns influenced by land features, by whether it's man-made, natural, mountain ranges, rivers, highways, with obviously increased urbanization across, the United States, obviously. And in your region, is there any correlation with movement patterns with man-made structures? I'm always curious about that. Are they using, highways? Are they using certain, man-made structures to help their migratory cues, if you will?
Yeah. So for the birds that I've been involved in that are marked with these telemetry units, I would say the birds in the central part of the country, so the central flyway, the only thing they're really probably doing is avoiding wind farms. And you see that in the telemetry data. You'll see them follow, river corridors, but you don't really see them avoid many other man-made structures. But the central part of the country isn't really as populated, sort of, as much as the east. And then in the west, you're going to see them follow mountain ranges. They're either going to get on the front range, and follow the front range up into the prairies, or they're going to they know those passes that they can get over. I do find it interesting though. So pintails that we've marked, we marked birds in Southwest Arizona, and we marked birds here in the Middle Rio Grande of New Mexico. And like the birds that we marked in Arizona, they basically follow the Colorado River up to Las Vegas, sort of fly over that big shiny globe in the desert, and then get to the Salt Lake system and sort of shotgun from there. Where the birds here in New Mexico man, it's like a shotgun effect. As soon as they leave Bosque del Apache or Bernardo Wildlife Area, they just sort of like, they, we had one bird this year where we marked it, and 2 days later, it made almost a direct beeline east to Missouri. And then another bird, just went up to San Luis Valley, over to the Salt Lake system, and now is on the sort of the snow line in the Dakotas, waiting for things to thaw. So I find that fascinating. You have the same species, different wintering areas, and the decisions that they're making are just different. And these are all female pintails, so same sex, all adults. So it's like, okay, you're deciding your route back to the breeding areas, and it's like, it doesn't make sense. Like, why would you fly thousands of miles straight east to Missouri just to come back, into the prairies?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's the fun part of telemetry data.
Yeah,
right. You start looking at stuff. I can imagine back in the day when they really started looking at coyotes, and they all of a sudden they see an excursion that's like 300 miles, and you're like, what? Just took off in one direction, whatever. Like, just wow. And I know there's been a lot of things like that with whitetails, with bucks and things like that. But yeah, I can imagine the birds, migratory birds, have to be just an interesting and fascinating thing. I've never looked at telemetry data with them and gotten to be able to see that, but I could imagine that there's a lot of times it leaves you scratching your head going, what in the name of, are they doing? Like, it just doesn't make any sense, based on given history.
Yeah. And it's a reminder that we think we know a lot about these species, but we really don't. We have just scratched the surface. Just because as technology improves, we're able to ask a lot more intricate questions and answer those questions. And, science is meant to build on itself. So we're always wanting to learn and be better stewards for those species. Yeah,
exactly. So let's talk about migration strategies. So we got residents, we got, short migrators, long migrators. Let's kind of go into those a little bit. What kind of species, come to mind when you think of residents, short migrators, longer migrators in you guys' flyways, and any other strategies that I'm missing? I'm just shooting off the top of my head.
Yeah. I think of migration in three ways: hop, skip, and jump.
That's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
There's the resident, and then there's obligate, and everything in between. But I think of it sort of hop, skip, and jump, and then resident. Right. So when I think resident, I think Canada goose. Right. It's just sort of the typical resident. Right.
I think everyone listening agrees.
Yeah. So that aside, there other than mottle ducks on the West Gulf Coast in Florida, they're considered non-migratory. So I would say they're sort of on that borderline resident. They do probably move a little bit more than cagos. Mexican mallards, same. I think when we're talking about those brown ducks, they're just moving in response to resources. But sort of moving to those hop, skip, and jumpers, I would say teal are probably jumpers. And when I think of jumpers, it's sort of long distance migrants where you have these birds, these small little birds that are leaving the prairie potholes and, either staging on the Platte or making a beeline to Texas. And then from Texas going into, the northern coast of South America. So they're making these real big jumps, right? So they're not, it's just a decision. We're going to move thousands of miles, rest, recuperate, make another jump. So they're less movements in their migration. And the same way on the way back.
Which is crazy because how small they are.
Right.
You think about it and you're like, how does a bird that little be able to do that? But again, it goes back to habitat. Like, it goes back to conservation. They need fuel to refuel to make those long distances. And everybody likes shooting a blue wing. Everybody likes shooting a green wing. Everybody likes shooting a cinnamon teal. Guess what? You need to have things that help them, continue on and make those. Those are the little birds, man.
Well, yeah, you need the resources for them, and you got to be in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, true. Those suckers are quick too.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah. And then you have those other birds that are going to sort of mix in hopping and skipping, where the movements between those fueling points are going to be just shorter. So decisions are different. I would say that the birds that are going to make those short movements are going to be the birds that are influenced by weather events. So whether it be north or south, as they're coming south, they're going to be influenced by that colder weather, snow, blizzard type conditions, and they're just going to get out in front of that storm system. And then on the way back, it's going to be they're not going to want to fight that north wind. So they're going to wait for that good southwest wind to help them move back up into the breeding areas. So that's how I sort of think about migration, just hop, skipping, and jumping. Like, what decision are we making? How much length are we putting between fueling locations or final destinations?
Yeah. Speaking of, like early migrators and things, when it comes to, I'm assuming that the states individually set their dates and bag limits, correct? Based on the data that you guys are providing.
Correct. Yeah. So we as the Fish and Wildlife Service create the framework, and then the states base their dates within that framework. Yep.
Yeah, it's just I know it's a hot topic, and I try to stay away from it because you're never gonna make everybody happy, but it's it's just always interesting to see because people got to understand, like, season dates and things like that are set because of the ecological needs of the bird, right? It's such a complex subject that it's not talked about enough. I don't really want to get too into it at all really here because you could go down a rabbit hole, and something like that. Plus, really from your guys' level, you provide, to me, it just goes, the science is the science. Here's 2 + 2, 2 + 2 is 4. This is what we're seeing, and we got to deal with what we got to deal with. Like, I know what we're going to be talking about next episode with Phil, on the genetic side. It's just going to be interesting for people to hear. I know you're dealing with it. I told you we no need to bring a bunch of the genetic stuff up now because I'll go into it more with Phil, who's got all the data and the numbers and can talk to it a lot more. Even though he told me to hit you with some of it.
His tab is getting really expensive.
It is, yeah. But it's just worth hearing because the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. I don't think people don't hear from you guys that often. And I don't think I think people are under the assumption that there's thousands of you guys out there, in each state, doing all this work and all of a sudden they're like the especially with the goose issue, like, these things are not migrators, why can't we just smack all of them, type of thing. And it's one of those things that just gets boiled down and it's frustrating. I get it. I'm glad. Hey, listen, I do not envy you having to deal with some of the stuff that you guys do at the federal level as well as the state, type of thing. And yeah, but, so what are, for people listening, they're maybe just new into waterfowlers, what are typically your early migrators and what species are typically your mids and typically your, the late runners?
Yeah. So teal right away.
Yeah. It's earliest.
Are the earliest just because of that early teal season that we have available. Yeah. And then it's going to be a mix of things. And I would say, maybe not even species dependent. I would say it's going to be age dependent and experience. So the older the bird, they're probably going to know when to leave and when not to leave. And then sort of get into that habitat conservation side. They're going to exploit that resource that's on the ground wherever they are for as long as they can. So it's going to be driven by a lot of different things. It's going to be social cues. It's going to be, weather. It's going to be the amount of forage on the landscape. And they're going to make that decision to leave. So mallards, pintails, sort of those bigger, medium-sized ducks are going to be your not your stragglers. Sometimes mallards are stragglers. I would say the other birds, pintail, gadwall, widgeon, they're all going to be, sort of moving through in that medium or mid-sized time frame. And then I guess mallards can be lazy. I think they're going to be one of the last ones to move. Just from knowing some of the research, seeing those birds still up in North Dakota when most of the state's frozen over, but some of those big reservoirs are still open.
Yeah, that happens here.
So
yeah, it happens here, and the weather's a big component too, because our winter up here this year was relatively warm. We didn't have much snow. There wasn't much, and especially people who ice fish weren't happy because there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity to do that. I mean, just the water just didn't really freeze here. And we're starting to see it, now with the hen house project we've got going on, looking at, nests that we've had up, and we put, early February, we put nests up, and, we kind of redid all the bedding and everything like that. And, by the end of February, first part of March, we're already seeing nest bowls being formed, and you're like, holy crap, like this is early, and then we got hit with some freeze, and, we've got nests with clutches, they haven't been incubated yet or started incubating. And now, we're pulling frozen eggs out and they're cracked, and you're like, dang, man. So, weather's a big issue, and our weather is so inconsistent for the most part. It's consistent, but we have those varying inconsistencies that you see, changes, that are responsive to this, and whatever what it is, and we'll talk with Phil about the domesticated and the DNA issues that we're seeing, especially with mallards, and how that could be an influence. But still, no matter what species you're dealing with, like you said, I mean, there's a lot of cues. The older ones know when to go, like, hey, this is the cycle that's starting to happen, whether it's photo period, weather related, food resource related, all the above. Those things are going to cause birds to come and go, type of things, and even move, like you said, north, laterally. You're seeing crazy, changes east and west. Birds are going to move, depending on what's going on. So, they're going to go where the resources are. And it's interesting because here we see that, where we will see mallards, a large amount of them that just, they're here, they're residents, they're not going anywhere. And if they do, they're not going very far. I mean, here in Ohio, up where I am, I'm about an hour south of Lake Erie. So we get where we get the snow belt and stuff like that. It gets colder than it does in other parts of the state, so other parts of the state, birds might move a little bit, but they're not going very far. But I don't have the telemetry data to back that up. That's my guess, being in the field, because you look around, like you said, there's resources. We're heavy ag, and these puddle ducks and, mallards, I mean, there's grain all over the place. They're going to eat, whether it's a good food source. We can argue that all day, but they're still going to eat it. And if it's there and they can eat it, why leave? And it just makes it difficult to try to pin down. So, looking at the migrations, explain, from the biological level. People get tired of hearing me, talk about it. What really is driving the southern migration, and then from the southern migration north? Like, biologically, what are the birds trying to accomplish?
So you're wanting to talk about as those birds are deciding to head back to the breeding grounds?
Yeah, like the breeding grounds. I mean, it's common sense, for a lot of people, but I think there's a lot of people that truly don't understand, the driving force behind, going down to south for the breeding grounds, and, and then what drives, because in consideration, you're like, well, hey, if you go into an area to breed, obviously it's great. Why are we not living here? Why are they flying back north? Type of thing, so kind of, biology, waterfowl biology 101 this.
Yeah. So that drive to come back to the breeding grounds is going to be based off experience. So these birds start to form pair bonds. So they start to acquire mates for that season. Even during the hunting season. So like mallards and pintails, they'll start to form these pair bonds December, January, February,
Yeah,
and
for
then
sure.
start moving again in March. And really, the female is driving that move back north because she has experience in a location where she has been successful. So there's a strategy behind breeding, and they're wanting to get back to that area where they have had success. So they know that area has all the things that they need. They have a nest or an area that they know they can put a nest in. Water is close by where they can take that brood once it's fledged, and then they can raise that brood on that water body. That water body is going to have all the invertebrates, seed source necessary for those ducklings to grow, and then be basically recruited into the population. So that move north is going to be driven by the female. So that mate is going to follow her, and she's going to have experience in location. And I think that's probably the simplest way to do it, or to explain it. And then that move south, when that pair bond has been broken, when the male goes to molt and the female is done raising that clutch, it's going to be, I would say it's probably more weather forage based, where they're exploiting the resource. That resource is being depleted, over the course of the summer into the early fall. And then they're gonna make that decision, like, hey, kind of like people coming to Arizona, right? They've learned that Arizona is actually not bad in the wintertime. It's actually pretty comfortable. It gets a little warm. You don't have to deal with snow. So, they want to come south where the winters aren't as bad. Forage resources are available, and it's an easier time to get through or eke by.
Yeah, and I bring it up, and I know, people who are listening to this that are waterfowl hunters are probably like, well, yeah, no shit, type of thing. But it's the same thing with I bring it up because I've had to me, it's a no shit moment when, we're talking about turkey populations. It's like, and I've talked about this on other episodes, like my parents' property, it's surrounded by timber. I don't have the ability to manage the timber. Landowners don't want it done. So my parents' property is a very small component of that. But, in the fall, heavy oak, hardwood, timber stand, plenty of roost opportunities. And my parents will have 60 to 70 birds, there. I'll be out in my deer stand hunting, and I'll watch them roost, go up the roost, come down to roost, depending when I'm hunting. There is no shortage of turkeys. However, you get into the springtime, my dad's like, my turkeys are gone. I'm like, yeah, think about it. I'm like, it's breeding season. Like, there's nothing here. I can see through this timber stand 300 yards. There's no brood rearing cover. There's no nesting cover. Like, why would you nest here? Like, they're off looking in their nesting areas where these hens have had success, if they've been alive long enough to, have one. But it's the same thing with waterfowl. And if you're managing your property for waterfowl, you have to understand that. Going back to the guy's property that we were at, he understands that. We've got our season, this time of year, we're in our breeding season, the nesting season. We're looking to, have successful pair bonding, mating and clutches of ducklings. That's the whole driving force of it. And then when we have a foot of snow, which we normally do on the ground, and there's no resources, they're having their vacation down in the southern part of the United States. Like, they're snowbirds. The joke is for, retired people to be snowbirds. Where do you think that came from?
Right.
To go down there. So, it's just, my job as an educator as well as, I look at it to where you can very easily assume the easy question is easy and everybody understands it. As a professor, I don't know. I mean, I know you got your PhD. I don't know how much teaching that you did, but it's like, hey, you hear the old adage, if you have a question, raise your hand, because there's a chance that, 6 other people in this class have the same question that you just don't want to ask, type of thing. So I think it's just a good kind of outline to understand, because as I build on, this episode, I had Dr. Frank on from Delta, and we kind of talked about Delta and stuff like that a little bit more, but, you're really like the first kind of, where everything's going to kind of go from here on the waterfowl front. Like I said, Dr. Phil's coming on. Dr. Phil. That's not, yeah, Dr. Phillip, not Dr. Phil. Dr. Philip, Lavretsky is coming on, next episode. And we're going to talk about all of his genetic research around waterfowl, which, might aggravate some people, might get people interested, too. Because I'm not aggravated is not the right word. It's just, like I said, a little bit depressing on some of it, what you look at. But it's super fascinating. Like, if you like science at all, you're like, this is it, man. This is the driving force. This is the data. Like, you can argue till you're blue in the face. DNA does not lie. Like, and here's the evidence.
Yeah. Phil is helping us out big time.
Yeah, that's what he was saying. I mean, he's got his hands in everything. And it's funny because when I decided I wanted to do my PhD, I was asking all these questions, and you start doing literature reviews, and you're like, well, this has pretty much been studied a lot, type of thing. And I wanted to incorporate something around the hen house structures that we were using. And there's other things we can do, but now you start talking about hundreds of hen houses to get the data that you need. I'm like, we don't have the manpower to do that. I don't have the time to do that. So it's challenging kind of coming up with an idea, of what am I going to study? We were talking about it off air, looking at this, and I'll save it. I'll bring it up with Phil because people will be like, what are you talking about? Type of thing. It'll make more sense. We'll talk about it on that episode. So those of you listening, you have to listen to the next episode as well, if you're curious. But, it's that idea because, that's how things progress. I mean, the research needs to be driven by something, and DNA, what you guys are doing, look at like things with the Mexican duck and the model duck and, all the stuff you guys are doing, whether it's telemetry data, whether it's working with Philip in his lab, genetic studies and looking at hybridization and speciation and all these different things that we'll talk about, more nerdy stuff, next episode, people are just gonna have to deal with, right? They're going to get an update on their refresher as far as their high school genetics class, listening to that. But it's all based around, bringing the education, the awareness, because then the more people start to learn about, how things are done, even though this conversation, between you and I is pretty fundamental, right? There's nothing, crazy about talking about the flyways. Yeah, these are 4 flyways. I know that, what the U.S. Fish and Wildlife does, but there's a lot of people that don't know what you guys do, and as you start educating more people on what you guys do and the framework you're building, the science around what you guys are seeing in the air and on the ground, and then how that goes into the state of Ohio, like I deal with, or New Mexico, or you, or Texas, wherever, how these decisions are starting to be made, I think can help bridge that gap for people and start getting people more on board with things that are being done, or even if things are not being done, maybe at least asking the question like, hey, why is this being done the way that it is, from an actual inquisitive, scientific perspective, whether or not you don't mean it to be that way, rather than just an emotional response. Like, hey, I think you guys are doing a terrible job. You guys are screwing up. You see it with deer all the time, you guys are screwing up my deer hunting because I don't see deer. The state's mismanaging the deer. It's like, oh, that's the problem. Let's go look at your property. That's the problem. The state. Yeah. Okay. Type of thing. I've had many of those conversations with people. And then usually when we're done, they're like, okay, type of thing. So for me, it's just about bringing awareness, is really why I do this podcast, is talk to, other scientists like you and Phil and all these other people. Hey, what do you guys do? What are you doing? What's the research? What's the management strategy? If, bringing big waterfowlers on here, hey, how are you approaching public versus private, type of thing. And just to give people more of a background and understanding, tools in the toolbox, whatever you want to call it. So as we'll get close here to wrapping it up, anything fun and exciting you guys got coming down project wise that you're interested in talking about, or anything like that fun that maybe people don't realize is coming?
Fun. So I get to go.
I know. As soon as I said that, I was like, man,
yeah.
Well, field work. It can be fun, but it's the other stuff. See, people are like, oh, you're a wildlife biologist. That must be so much fun. No, the fun is 10% of the job. The other 90% is the reporting and the paperwork and the meetings and oh my Lord.
Yeah, I guess the two things that I've got. So first thing is I always look forward to May because I get to go up on May survey. I'm the ground crew leader for the Western Dakotas and Eastern Montana. Absolutely love that landscape up there. And I get to look at ducks.
I'm jealous.
Yeah. So that I look forward to that work, and then this Southern Arizona waterfowl project, I think, is really going to be unique because Mexican mallards really haven't been studied. Dabbling ducks really haven't been studied in the southern part of that state. They definitely have some breeding habitat up in the White Mountains in eastern Arizona, but not sort of down in that desert landscape. And like kind of gets to what you've been talking about, like conservation. How can we provide habitat in a very arid environment through private landowners that are going to help support continental, populations, whether it's overwintering or moving down into Mexico, because that's sort of the conduit to the Mexican, or part of the conduit to the Mexican highlands and Sonoran and Sinaloan coasts, which are really important for pintail and other dabbling ducks. So I look forward to getting that up and running, and I'm actually working with Phil on that one as well.
I'm gonna have to. Hey man, I'm gonna have to reach out to you guys. I'm gonna have to make a trip. I was talking to him. I was like, man, we'll have to stay connected too, because as that research goes on, I'm going to be interested as well. It's a beautiful thing of having my own podcast. I'm like, hey, it's interesting. We're going to talk about it.
So, I mean, I don't. Since the fieldwork hasn't really developed, and I don't know the need yet, but I have a long-term, so 10+ year project on sandhill cranes. Here in New Mexico. Well, just basically in the West, and I trap and ban cranes every winter, and I'm always looking for. Everybody wants to come and and put their hands on a modern day pterodactyl. But I mean, if you want to come and catch cranes, I'm also trying to get a wintering banding project going at Bosque del Apache, looking at body condition.
Okay, scores.
Of ducks and trying to tie it to local level management because of some of the not habitat issues, but some of sort of the supplemental forage issues that are going on here in the valley. Like if we reduce supplemental forage and we're under water restrictions, we'll have less wetlands on the landscape. So that means less natural forage for these birds. Is it going to push them out, or is it going to influence their condition to where, kind of like what we're talking about, those cross-seasonal effects, is it going to have some long-term effects on reproductive biology? So,
nice.
So I'm sure Phil and others that you talk to, we always have sort of ideas in our heads, sort of talk about projects, but
it's the funding aspect that becomes the problem. It's like, listen, I can study things so blue in the face. I've got 10 ideas since we started talking about stuff, right? It's whether or not it's been done, and it just but. A lot of people are just probably like, you nerd. My friends do it all the time. They're like, the stuff that excites you or gets you going. I'm like, well, yeah. I'm a scientist. I mean, first and foremost, I'm a scientist. I've said it multiple times. As much as I love to hunt, I love the management of the hunt. I love the preparing for the hunt. If it's food plotting, timber stand work, I like the post-harvest work, like, aging a deer, getting the biological data, the sex, the weight, all those different types of things, whether it's a bird, looking at a bird, when I shoot a mallard or, whatever bird in the hunting season, looking at a bird and like, hey, this is a yearling bird, or this is a, 2-year-old plus bird. Like, guys are like, who cares? I'm like, who cares? I'm like, when you're managing populations, you need to care. Like, I need to care. You don't need to care, but I need to care. So shut up and just let me do it. Let me see your bird.
That's a good point. Like,
yeah,
that's a really good point. Like, the general hunting public, they don't necessarily need to care, but they need to know that somebody does care, and that's folks like you and I who are trying to gather that data to allow them to not care.
Well, and it's even too, like, if you enjoy that, and maybe you always wanted to be a scientist, like, you can keep data records. Like, we have harvest records for deer, we have harvest records for turkey. I've been pretty bad about it with waterfowl, so do as I say, not as I do. But I'm going to fix it this year. I'm going to make a more conscious effort to do it. I just get so busy, But it's like, hey, man, like, you could call up the state and be like, you know what? Hey, I've been shooting birds for 10 years, and I've got logs on all the different birds I've shot, the sexes, the weights. I've got everything. That takes nothing for you to do, And if you want to do a little citizen science that can help out, make management decisions like that, that helps. Oh my God, this guy shot a limit of mallards, for 10 years, and he's hunts 4 days a week, type of thing. And I mean, those are real-time numbers that can be used, for management decisions, or be like, hey, depending on the species, you got species that, are having issues, and you find a property where they're not. Well, what's going on? What do they like about this landscape that they don't like about other areas? And maybe we can build off of, right? So, you can take any data. There's no bad data. We can always say, I already have it. They don't really need it. But yeah, it's one of those things, because I'll get people every season, doesn't matter, mostly deer and mostly coyotes, because I've got a veterinary background as well. Most of the time people shooting a coyote, how old do you think this coyote is? I'm like, well, I can't look at its teeth. Like, you got to show me, like, I got to get hands on it. Or deer, like, what do you think this thing scores? How old do you think this thing is? Well, give me its jawbone. Like, people that call me a nerd, and all this stuff in my face, love them to death, but they're the ones that are texting me going, hey, what do you think this thing scored? I don't know. Figure it out. Don't want to hear it. Type of thing. But yeah, it's how many of those text messages you get about what bird this is?
A lot.
Yeah.
And it's mostly from family members. They're like, oh,
yeah.
No.
Well, and that's another thing too. Jeff, our chairman here at local Delta branch, he gets hot on this topic, because he hunts some public land and stuff like that. And he runs into people that are like, yeah, I shot these birds. And, he comes out, he's like, no, you didn't. Like, that's a hen wood duck, or that's not the situation. I'm just making something up. Like, oh man, I shot this hen mallard, or I shot 5, or I shot whatever. It's like, no, man, like, that's not a hen mallard, type of thing. So how many having just these skill sets, you don't have to be a biologist to understand how to ID a bird and how to tell if that bird is a year or two old. Like, if it's, a bird that's worth shooting, if you want to do conservation, don't smack that bird. I mean, listen, little bastards fly fast. It's a little hard to do. So, I'll give you a pass on that one, but you got to understand what bird you're shooting. It's like, you got to know what your limits are, and you got to know what it is that you're shooting. Otherwise there's conservation problems that we have to deal with that you don't know you're dealing with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that actually is a thing going on in Central Flyway, where Nebraska and South Dakota have created a tiered license system where you can choose between being a full-fledged waterfowl hunter and being I can't remember the name that they've given it, basically novice beginner, where you don't have to ID the bird, but your bag limit is reduced, and it's meant to recruit, retain, and reactivate folks. So we are thinking about that sort of thing.
Yeah, and it's good because it's good. It's a pain in the butt. People are going to go, oh, whatever. But it's like, it's same thing with fishing. I can't tell you how many times I've been stopped, fishing, the lakes, and, a resource officer comes over and just, not a resource officer, but a technician or something with the division. And they're like, hey, catching anything today, whatever. And you'll give you a card like, hey, can you tell me what these fish are? Type of thing. I don't know how many people run into that. It's happened to me, 3 or 4 times, out fishing on the boat. Guy comes over, and you're thinking like, oh, here we go. You just start getting your license out, your driver's license. Like, here we go. I was catching fish. Now he's going to come over here and do, type of thing. But they come over and they give you some flashcards and say, hey, or whatever they do now. Back then, when this happened the last time, it was flashcards. Can you tell me what these fish are? It's a good skill to have.
Yeah,
are you catching, crappie, or is this a striped bass or a smallmouth? People screw it up. And if you're going after a limit, like, hey, it's going to save you money from a ticket, but it's also going to help, the numbers of the species or whatever it is that you're doing. So, it's a valuable skill. Don't make fun of us nerds, man. Like, we do this for a reason.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the internal argument or discussion amongst the waterfowl folks is, do we really want to not necessarily dumb it down, but, do we want to lose that culture of knowing what you're shooting at, knowing what you have in your bag? Yeah. But we also are starting to recognize, like, people, it's just different. And we're trying to sort of maintain that culture, but also be a little bit flexible for as things change.
Yeah, I think waterfowlers, though, as far as all the hunting groups, are pretty good about. I belong to a lot of the groups on social media, and there's a good high percentage of people that are really good with ID. Because I think a lot of things that and again, I just posted a social media post the other day. My wife makes fun of me because, I mean, I keep binoculars in my truck, and like when I know I'm going around water, I don't want to be reaching for it, so I've got like my harness on, look like an idiot, but I'm like, hey, yeah, people, my friends and family make fun of me, but I'm like, this is what I do. Like, I need to be able to go, oh, there's a bird, pop up my binos and go, oh, that's a green-winged teal drake, or that's a common merganser, whatever it is, like just that split second, what is that, type of thing. And I'll do it like internally in my head. I'm driving by and I'm like, I see, in the growing season, what plants are there. And I like, can I ID that quick? Like, do I have it that ingrained into my head that I can just look at something and then bam, ID what it is? Because for me as a consultant, time is money, right? If I'm doing a wetland delineation or a habitat assessment, if I got to take 2 or 3 days to key out all the vegetation that's there, that's a problem. So how do you test yourself? Driving by something 30 miles an hour and go, I know I'm taking it too far. I know, you can tell me, but that's the way I think.
They got an app for that. You just take a picture.
Exactly.
Of it.
Yeah. Listen, those apps are stupidly accurate. Like some of those anymore, man, I wanted to hate them. I'm like, nope, I'm going to key this thing out because I know what this is, and this is how I had to learn it. And now I teach at the university, and these kids are spoiled, and now they get all these AI apps that they can use that identify. I put one out the other day. It's like, orchard grass. I'm like, what? I'm like, it's not even growing season yet, and I'm like, yes, that is orchard grass. I'm like, holy crap, type of thing. So you talking about Philip and what he's trying to do with the ID. I mean, listen, that's a real possibility. And that would be really good, and we'll kind of leave it that. I'll talk with him about that on the next episode. But, stuff like that's a game changer. Like you said, the science and conservation and management's all going to change with technology. Technology gets better, so does our data.
I'm like you when I'm out running. So I trail run, and it keeps me sane. And I'll stop and I'll ID plants that I don't know, and I'll ID birds too. I'll use that Cornell bird, and just go through and. I'm like, oh, that's right. That's what that is. Yeah.
I'm horrible with that. There's a guy I know that went to my high school. I never really was friends with him or anything, but he's a birder, and he's one of the top ones like in the world. Like he's guided all across the world and worked in Africa, and he went to school there. And I'm like, holy crap. And I've been out with some of those guys. I'm sure you have too. I'm better at visual ID, the audio or audible ID. I'm like acoustic ID. Talk right.
Well,
like,
so that that Cornell app actually has a
you can hold it on there. Yeah. I've used it, but like trying in my head, I've been with these guys. They're like, all right, let's see what it is, and I'm like, all right, I got 2. He's like, Eric, I got like a dozen. You're like, oh, I thought those were all the same bird. It's like, I don't know. Yeah. I don't work with songbirds, man. Like, you give me a turkey gobbling, now we're good.
I know. I got a good buddy that I'll grab beer with, and he's same way. He's trying to get a bird for every family, so he travels the world and like he can ID stuff. And I'm like, I'm just the caveman game bird biologist. I know this like really small portion of birds out of the thousands.
Yeah, that's my thing is, because when I was younger in my career, my God, I was a deer guy, predator guy. Like, it's what I still am, but waterfowl, it's been fun these past couple years because I've really been dusting off, I'm behind the camera here. My bookshelf has acquired a lot more waterfowl management booklets, books and hardcover books and stuff. I mean, I've got some from grad school, but like dusting off and looking the notes and looking at, plumage changes and breeding behaviors of certain species. And it's like just recommitting all that stuff back to memory is just, it's good and healthy, because you go so long, you get stale, you get stagnant a little bit, you get comfort in your own zone. And, now that people are I got buddies asking me questions, I'm like, shit. I'm like, okay. Yep. Yeah. You start looking at it. Yeah.
We need to talk offline. I need to get your mailing address. I've got like 6 bookcases worth of books that I don't need any longer, or I've got duplicates of stuff. And
man,
more than willing to share.
Awesome.
To share.
Yeah.
I don't want to send you something you already have.
Well, yeah, and especially too, they I'm working on putting together some more courses at the university that I teach at, which isn't a wildlife. They don't have a wildlife degree. They got biology degrees. It's a Division I school, and they don't have a wildlife science degree. They have a conservation degree, and I'm trying to put together, interest in, I want to do a waterfowl, an upland game bird ecology course, and they're like, well, I don't know how interested that would be. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, I teach forestry and I get like, it's booked as soon as you enter it. The wildlife resources classes are booked as soon as you get it. Like, I have to fill out paperwork, to let these students in because I have room. Like, there is a demand here. Not everybody who does a biology degree, like you, wants to go to medical school. Mine was vet school. I went to vet school, and it was like, it's one of those to where not everybody wants to do that, so you got to cater to that. And I also teach an environmental permitting class because I went to them and I said, hey, like, getting into the world of non-medical as a biologist, you're either going to be working in a position for the federal government or state government, we'll just say government, or as a consultant. And you have to understand permitting. You have to understand the Migratory Bird Act. You have to understand when the federal duck stamp was created. You have to understand the Pittman-Robertson Act and, how the Army Corps 404 program is established and what it does. Like, you got to understand these things because you are navigating that regulatory framework in any of those industries, type of thing. So, to me, you need to add these courses. General ornithology class is booked. You think people aren't going to take a duck class where I could take you guys out to a marsh and go field ID ducks and waterfowl? And like, you're delusional if you think that is not going to be a popular course. So I'm working on courses like that because my faculty colleague that's helping me with the henhouse project, he is a PhD full-time faculty, but he's a wildlife biologist. He's the only other wildlife guy, so me and him are the ones that teach a lot of those courses, and we're trying to, build that threshold, because especially with a conservation degree, like we've talked about on other episodes where, teaching at the university, in talking with others that have been on here that are professors as well at big universities, in wildlife programs, the percentage of students going into those programs, you're starting to see it increase that don't have hunting backgrounds, that, they don't, which, hey, you don't have, and I've said this before, you don't have to hunt, but you have to have an understanding of game species management. You have to understand that, there's, hunting is a component on accomplishing that, and trying to get that into, some of the kids' heads is challenging, but the more we can, offer classes like this to showcase how this stuff works. I mean, these are the people that are making decisions in the next 10, 15 years, at some point. So, anyway. All right, Dan, it's been a little over an hour. So like I said, I try to keep these to an hour. So thank you for coming on. We'll definitely stay in touch, and, as you guys develop more projects and stuff like that, that's interesting. We'll get on there, especially with the Mexican duck. I know that's going to be a hot one for a while because I've been seeing some stuff pop up, pretty recently about the Mexican duck and its listing and everything like that. And, with all the, I'm sure the research is gonna start skyrocketing.
Wait, when you say listing, what do you mean?
I don't remember, to be honest with you. I remember there was a few things published that.
Okay. Yeah. So it's not, all right. Just for clarification.
Yeah.
It's being recognized on the list of species for the MBTA. So it's being
Oh,
instead
that might have been what I saw.
Yeah.
Okay, I couldn't remember what it was.
Yeah. Just so people are,
Oh yeah, no, not threatened or endangered. Yeah, no. I was like, wait a minute. I'm like, what? I was like, oh yeah, it's a T&E species. No, it's not listed as a T&E species. Yeah, no, sorry about that. For a minute there, I was like panicking for a minute. I'm like, what did I see it listed for? And I'm like, I knew it was something that had to do with migratory status, but I was in my head, I wasn't sure, and I was like, wait, what other list? I'm like, oh yeah, the T&E. It is not. Yeah, same thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, thanks for throwing that out. Yeah.
I work to keep species off lists.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, it's been fun. So everybody, thanks for staying tuned and checking out this entire episode, and we will see everybody next time. All right, everybody, that wraps up another episode here at the Hunt Science Podcast. I want to thank everybody for checking out today's video. If you liked today's episode, go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you have not already done so. It's easy. You can click right here. It's going to subscribe you to the page. Of course, if you like today's video, also help us out by giving us a like, by hitting the thumbs up button, and of course, hitting that bell notification so that way you can be updated on all the future episodes and future content that we put out here on the channel. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. We can't wait to see you guys again on the next one. Until then, everyone, thank you for checking out the Hunt Science Podcast, and we'll see you next time.